against all rules, let me start by not thanking the organizers of this conference. Why? Because they managed to pack so many interesting papers at the same time that this conference was a permanent source of frustration for, I suppose, many of us, and in particular for me, as I have to summarize at least some of the things that I've learned. So within these few minutes, I'll just focus on one theme which was touched upon in very diverse ways at the plenary sessions and at the workshops I attended, and no doubt also at many of the workshops I had the frustration of not being able to attend. And this only theme is the relationship between basic income and growth. We had contrasting messages about that relationship. For example, at the end of Eduardo's letter to Dilma Rousseff, which was at the end of his paper, he defended basic income as a great way of reconciling economic growth and the reduction of extreme poverty. But then, on the other hand, to take just one example, Tobias Krall, who is an Austrian, young Austrian, presented one of the papers, reminded us that basic income was at the core of the programs of many of the projects for degrowth. So basic income is that basic income an instrument of growth or an instrument of degrowth? And this came up again and again at the conference. For example, even in the context of the Piketty workshop, in a way, Piketty's book, or one way of summarizing in one sentence Piketty's book is that fiscal redistribution is an essential way, an essential instrument for saving capitalism from capitalists. And so it's this enormous level and growing level of inequality that creates a major threat to sustainable growth under capitalism. And the connection with basic income can be made because, as was clear in the passages I quoted at that workshop, Thomas Piketty sees basic income as one ideal way of redistributing income. Basic income is an essential way of making capitalism work better, being better for capitalist growth. Even at very different examples, so what we saw in this fantastic video and presentation about India, but the Indian scheme, well, there are various ways, although there were no indicators in terms of direct impact on GDP per capita in Madhya Pradesh, we could see that the schemes obviously had a major impact on registration and attendance at school. It had a major impact on health. It had an impact on various sorts of productive investments, so we can presume it was good for growth. And all this, we need to fit it somewhere, somehow, with other things we've learned about basic income. For example, the most massive experiment about something like a basic income were these negative income tax experiments in North America in the 1970s. And one of the lessons was the negative impact on the supply of labor. Not enormous, but significant. And if supply of labor diminishes, we can expect also the rate of growth to be less than it would be in the absence of this sort of redistributive schemes. Indeed, basic income is often presented as an alternative to, for example, Jennifer Nedelsky's scheme of imposing, in her case through social norms, the reduction of maximum working time, which again cannot be expected to be positive in terms of the impact of on growth. So how can we sort this out? So, and I've just mentioned, I could mention 17 other references to this debate which I heard at this conference. Well, we need to distinguish the factual question and the normative question. Factual question, is basic income good or bad for growth? Normative question, should it be good for growth or bad for growth? Factual question, if people ask you, is a basic income good for growth? Refuse to answer the question. Why? First of all, as we've seen also at some points in this conference, we need to distinguish basic income from guaranteed minimum income generally. like in the Madhya Pradesh case, about a real basic income of $8 per month and per person, or in the Swiss case, $2,000 per person and per month. These are very different things. 3, it depends very much on what the baseline is. It's very different to introduce a basic income as a replacement of a means-tested guaranteed minimum income scheme, as is being proposed in European countries, many European countries, and introducing a basic income when there is no redistributive scheme prior to that. So it's a completely different question, introducing a basic income in these two contexts. 4, it depends very much on how the basic income is funded. And so the impact on GDP in these villages in India, for example, will be different depending on whether the scheme is funded by UNICEF or by taxation on the rich in these particular villages. And so this is only one of the many examples. In Alaska, if you fund it with the revenues from oil, it's different from funding it through a wealth tax in Alaska in terms of the sustainable impact on growth. So there are all these differences, and of course there are far more, including even if you have exactly the same scheme, replacing exactly the same things, but in a different social and cultural context, with a greater or less importance in terms of social norms, work ethic, etc., it will have a very different impact. So if you are asked, is basic income good for growth, bad for growth, refuse to ask that question, but ask the people who ask that question to reformulate that question in a more specific way, related to a specific scheme, particular place, particular times. The normative question. Normative question, should basic income be good for growth or bad for growth? I think here it's the guiding ideas to answer that question are the following two. There are two. One is about the aggregate, the other one about distribution. What should be our overall aim? Should it be maximum growth of GDP? Certainly not. Should it be something called development or even sustainable development? No. I think at the aggregate level, what we must aim for is somewhat more complicated, but not very much. It's a sustainably generalizable way of living. A way of living is the standard of living, but it's also our way of moving about, our way of building our houses, our way of producing, our way of consuming, etc. And that must be sustainably generalizable. Generalizable, that is not restricted to a privileged minority of mankind, and sustainably, that is not limited to just one generation, even if it's then generalized throughout the world. Sustainably generalizable way of living. That's the aim. And one central component, in my view, of this sort of general objective, this horizon, is an unconditional basic income as a floor of income for everyone. But there is not just a question of the aggregate, it's also the question of distribution. How should we frame the objective there? And my simple slogan for that is maximum real freedom, the maximization of the minimum real freedom. And that came out also very clearly. For example, in the Indian case, where Guy insisted on the emancipatory character of the basic income, or just at the workshop I attended now, when Almas pointed out that the advantage of basic income over the Swedish model related in the fact that it was about distribution of economic power, as opposed to just purchasing power or income. And so the distributive aim must be formulated in those terms: real freedom, economic power, emancipation. And then that, of course, is quite different from trying to maximize the minimum income, the minimum purchasing power. And therefore, it's more remotely related to the aim of growth, even though, of course, it will certainly imply that in many parts of the world, in Brazil, in India and so on, it will require us to favor growth and to use basic income as a tool for growth. So that these were the 2 points I wanted to make. So there is the factual question about whether basic income leads to growth or not. There is no general answer to that. We need to specify it. And then, should it be to grow or not, this question must be approached using these two parts of our horizon: sustainably generalizable way of life, one, and two, maximum real freedom in terms of distribution between individuals. How do we get there? And just close with that. I was interested in the way in which conditional cash transfers came into the discussion at various junctures, including Ruben Lovolo, who expressed some frustration at the fact that, in fact, basic income was losing some popularity in various places because of the success of conditional cash transfers, about which we heard from the very first session. There is no reason to be sad about that. I think conditional cash transfers are an important move forward. It's not because we think about something more ambitious that we should regret the important steps that were made by the Bolsa Familia, Progressa, and so on. Of course, at the same time, we must remain critical, and one of the interesting things in the Indian pilot studies is that even if there is no conditionality, there is a very important impact on school attendance. And so that I personally have, with Eduardo will remember our meeting with President Cardoso a long time ago, I'm pragmatic on these things. I really don't object to the conditionality in the Brazilian thing, providing it's implemented in a sufficiently loose way. It certainly helps to make it politically feasible, but then from then on we can learn from what is achieved there and then move forward. Just one more thing about these conditional things, which is something I learned also since our last Congress, which is sometimes we progress thanks to the deficiencies of the existing system. My last visit to Brazil, there is something that struck me, which is that in order to enter the system, you will need to have some sort of assessment of your income over the last period. But then once you are in for 6 years. There is no more control in these 6 years except for the age of your children. So that means, that effectively over the 6 years, you can top up your income exactly the same way as you could do with the basic income. It operates as a floor, not as a safety net in which you get stuck. Strictly speaking, this is a defect in a means-tested scheme, where these people are cheating because they have an income that's higher than the maximum that should entitle them to the benefit. But of course, at the same time, it's a virtue of the system, because this is part of the way in which this sort of imperfect conditional schemes can further contribute to an improvement of the situation of these people and of growth generally for Brazil. So, just to finish, so I think and that's why these events are so important, and we should keep sharing these experiences, very different from across the world, thinking together about the pragmatic steps that lead us in the direction of a basic income, without being purist about it, without being saying, oh, it's a not all or nothing, or either a full basic income or nothing. No, we should use opportunities in order to move forward, hence the great importance of this sharing of experience, and hence also, to return to what I said at the beginning, hence my great gratitude to the organizers of this conference. In particular, I should say to Jurgen. So if I had someone like Jurgen for every single thing I try to organize, I would be in paradise.
I will say a few words as regional coordinator of BICN in the last two sessions in which I've been a member of the Executive Committee. And what I want to reflect on relates to developments, as we've heard so much about in this conference in Europe. And how exciting I think it is that what is the way I see it is happening, is that we're seeing what was previously considered disparate progressive ideas coming together and being seen as complementary rather than as alternatives. But I think at the same time that this remains a challenge for us, and so I want to talk a little bit more about the importance of not making contrast. First of all, make a slightly contrasting remark to something Philippe said, not to make a contrast between the Scandinavian welfare model and the basic income. I think the Scandinavian welfare model, because it embeds the value of shared security within its institutions, is very much a model for a basic income. It's very much a natural forerunner for the implementation of basic income. And we should stop thinking about the Scandinavian model and somehow an impediment or an alternative to basic income. I feel that very strongly. But other than that, I want to say something about a slightly more concrete experience that I had as regional coordinator, which was in the context of a project that was set up by the Council of Europe, funded by the European Commission. And so again, we have an example of where a European institution, one of those centralized institutions that in many ways we don't like, has actually been progressive in the sense of bringing people together. The Council of Europe organized a project trying to bring together different progressive movements within Europe and having them sit down and talk out their ideas and see if we could come up with a progressive program and out of these different ideas. And so I participated along initially with other members of BICN. Yannick van der Voort was part of this, and Klaus Offer was part of this, in a series of sessions, which eventually culminated into a smaller working group where we were forced to sit for 8 hours a day, 5 days in a row, and talk to each other and try to come to an agreement. And it was quite interesting because the different representatives within this group represented different progressive ideas, and these were people that had achieved things, and yet they were absolutely in disagreement with each other's ideas at the outset. So at the very first meeting we had, Klaus Offer, representing basic income, and Ugo Mattei, who is a very exciting public figure in Italy and at the forefront of the Commons movement, and in fact he was one of the lead organizers of the campaign, successful campaign for the referendum against water privatization in Italy. They were like two bulls in a room with China, and they to Klaus Offer, the Commons was simply a form of paternalism, and it was simply a form of forcing people together that needing to work together and own resources, and while basic income was much better because it gave individuals personal ownership. And for Ugo Mattei, defending the Commons, the basic income was just simply an individualistic idea that fit into the neoliberal program of everyone for himself, and so it couldn't be resolved. So it took many meetings and a lot of persuasion. But eventually, 2 years later, at the public conference which we presented our report, that finally included consensually recommendations for moving towards greater common ownership of resources in local regions and management resources, and the basic income, and a progressive system of tax, amongst other things. Ugo was finally persuaded when I explained to him that with the basic income, the commons would be much stronger. That with the basic income, everyone could participate in the local organizing and management of resources on an equal basis. And therefore, far from being a detraction from the commons, basic income was a foundation for the commons. And we thought, all right, yeah, okay. The other source of resistance to basic income came, in a way surprisingly, from the homeless movement. And the representative of the homeless movement, I don't know if you know him, Philippe, but he's a Belgian. He's called Philippe. So you have a namesake there. And he was against basic, he was very afraid of basic income because he felt that it would take away the long-established rights, as you took the case of Belgium, but also in other countries, for stabilizing housing for the most needy. And he thought basic income, again, slightly along the lines of what Ugo Mattei felt, would become, it would lead to an individualization, an over-individualization of social service, of living, and too great emphasis on autonomy, and actually the principle of stable housing would be undermined, and people like him would then be forced into a nomadic existence, having a room here, having a room there. And so it was quite hard to persuade him as well. But I think in the end, the two arguments I made was, well, the first argument was, well, we needn't get away from that system. We can keep that system as we introduce a basic income, and basic income becomes a floor, and that means that you will have stable housing, and you will remain perhaps conditional on such and such, but you will have a basic income. And how can that detract from the rights we already have? But secondly, if we have a basic income, because of the principle of unconditional access to one kind of stability, albeit an income, it might actually lead to an understanding that we do need other unconditional basic rights, such as housing. And so at the end of the day, rather than having, albeit stable, but always this slightly conditional, slightly paternalistic access to housing, perhaps this would make room for a movement towards stable housing. And so finally he also agreed. And unfortunately the project came to an end. It was a nice report, and I haven't actually seen these guys since, but at least I know that whenever they come across basic income in the future, they will see it as a friendly idea, not as an antagonistic idea. But I think we do face that challenge still in Europe and everywhere else. And I think, therefore, that we must think very carefully about how we present the case. It's very possible, it's very difficult actually to present the case as antagonistic to other rights. When we really think about it, the basic income is clearly complementary to other progressive rights. And I wanted actually just to add there my regret that we didn't have representatives from the union movement, because it would have been quite nice in the context of the Council of Europe to try to persuade them as well. And I think we've all agreed, we talked about it in this conference, we face a special challenge when it comes to the union movement, that somehow unions in Europe and perhaps elsewhere feel threatened by the idea of the basic income. And again, for example, I was going to ask Eno actually yesterday, when you mentioned that you thought perhaps one of the outcomes, if there was a basic income in Switzerland, would be that wages would go down. And I wanted to ask you why you thought that. Because the way I see it, I don't think that is necessarily, or in fact I think the opposite would be the case. Okay, because when people are empowered with a basic income, they are negotiating power. And with negotiating power, they can choose if they want to work for a meager wage or in a job of good, of reasonable quality. So, in that sense, to try to persuade unionists, we mustn't say, with the basic income, it's likely that your wage will be lowered. And I don't actually think it will, in any case. With the basic income, our chances to organize collectively are strengthened. Our chances to improve working conditions are strengthened. Our chances to get a decent wage are strengthened. And so all these things that we have lost in Scandinavia, as Alma's quite rightly pointed out in her presentation on Sweden, I mean the voluntary aspect of collective bargaining, the comprehensive sense of solidaristic wage bargaining as well, that has achieved other social objectives. These things can be regained and rebuilt on a stronger foundation in the context of basic income. So we must try and persuade the union movement in particular, and I am very confident that it can be done. So that ends my comments in regional coordinator. I need to make two announcements apart from that. And the first announcement relates to my role as editor of Basic Income Studies, as co-editor of Basic Income Studies with Mike Howard. We want to tell you about the essay prize that is traditionally associated with BICN congresses. And so what this means is that unless anyone objects, all papers that have been presented, and I think we will extend the deadline as long as Jurgen is willing to extend the deadline for papers being uploaded as part of the presentations for the Congress, those who haven't finished their papers. We are prepared to wait as long as Jurgen is prepared to wait to put it up, perhaps a month or so, and then we will set down a panel of judges and we will select the best essay, and that essay will be published in Basic Income Studies. So I suppose the only reason I really need to say that is so in case anyone objects in part of this, you are all in, and if you do object, let me know. And finally, the other announcement I just need to make is that we will have the BICN General Assembly, which is the democratic body of the network of BICN, and that will take place, it will start at 1:30, so that will cut lunch a little short for you, and we hope that it will end at 3 o'clock. Everyone is welcome to attend, even if you are not a BICN member. Only BICN members can vote. That would be some things we need to vote on. But you're all very welcome to attend, and I hope you do. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if I can add too terribly much to this, But what I do want to say is that having the Congress in a law school is not taken lightly by me, and I think we should think about that more. And in that tradition, I think it's really important to get the questions right. But not the questions necessarily for the academics. I think it's even more important that we get the questions right for the public so that we can take the concepts that we've learned here out into the public sphere. So it leaves me, when I was asked to do the summary of this, is I don't know how to summarize it, but I did come up with a whole bunch of questions. And especially the questions that seem to encompass the themes of what we heard. And the really big one for me was, what kind of society do we really want? What kind of society should we have? And it really gets at the normative and the factual questions that Philippe was talking about. But we have to phrase it in such a way that the public can actually have that debate as well, and we can help them debate that in an informed way. It also leads me to think about, how do we create that society? So if our society was really based on the creation of a society of property owners, it seems to me, from what I've heard in the past few days, that we've failed terribly at that, and we're continuing to fail at that. And so there has to be some other better way. We need to think of something new, and we need to create a society that somehow creates a dignified citizenry. So how do we do that? How do we create a society of also equal citizens? How do we also create a society where we have access to equal opportunity, access to equal resources for all of the citizens? Do we create a society where we have absolute right to a minimum amount of money? I don't know the answers to these questions. But the other question that it then leads to me is, do we need a new economic charter or compact? Should a resolution come from a meeting such as this and be taken to the OECD or be taken to the UN? It leads me to questions that I think maybe BICN and the committee of BICN should think about and study. So I'm going to leave you with that. But before I do leave you, I do also have a one little thing as well. Although I'm co-chair of the events of the past few days, I think the one person who really needs to be thanked is Jurgen.
Red cheeks.
I know for the past more than a year, Jurgen has spent countless hours. This has been probably a full-time job for him. And I think it really shouldn't be underestimated, his contribution of putting the speakers together and getting people here and so on and so forth. As a little token of the appreciation of the board, I have a little gift for you. I'd also like to acknowledge the committee as well. So most of the committee is here. We have Tim Rourke up here. Here. Jim Mulvale. Where did Myron go? We also have Linda Lalonde, but she is not here today. And who else am I missing? Oh yes, Jenna, where are you? Jenna Bandrian. I guess she's not here right now, but Jenna was pretty instrumental as well. So thank all of you. Thank all of you for coming. I know you came from far and away, and we very much appreciated that, and I hope that you attend the next international. But Jurgen, you want to say something?
I'll be very contrary as usual and just stay seated for a change. So I want to say some thank yous as well. I'm going to spare you my reflections of BICN and so on. I think, I share whatever's been said here very much. I just want to add actually one thing. It's very important in this conference that we learn from each other, we listen from each other, we reflect and so on and so forth. But it's also important that we have fun. So I sincerely hope you had some fun as well, right? So two very practical points just before I say my thank yous. On papers on the web, I was actually going to mention this. If people still want to send their PDFs, just send them to me. I will put them up. I am going to sleep for a few days after this, so if you don't get it might take a week before I respond, but I'm very happy to put them up, so no problems on that. And I also am very aware that people, especially those of the Spanish persuasion, all need certificates, many certificates. So email me again in a few days, and no problem at all. We will get you whatever you need to, for your bureaucracies. I spent some time in Spain, so I sympathize. Okay, so I have a list of thank yous we have to go through because this conference really, Kelly was saying I put in a lot of hours, which is true, but there's a lot of people who helped out with this, and I think people do need to be acknowledged. So first of all, I really want to thank McGill Law Faculty. So we got this venue for free, and these people have been extremely, they were very enthusiastic having us, and they've been extremely helpful assisting us, anything to do with the building. First of all, Professor Daniel Weinstock, is the person who facilitated this. It's also, as director of the Institute of Health and Social Policy, he also put up some sponsorship for us. Daniel wanted me to tell you that, unfortunately, he couldn't attend very many sessions. He tried to pop in a few, mostly because those of us who know Daniel know that he always travels. He's a bit like Roberto. He's all over the place. And he literally just came back from Europe on Thursday, managed to get to the chairing session here, but then also had to sleep and had family commitments and so on and so forth. But he was extremely excited with the program, and he congratulates us as a group on a very interesting conference. I also want to thank many of the administrators at McGill Law who have been very helpful. Thomas Chalmers, who's the person in charge of the buildings, has been extremely helpful. He had this little joke he kept telling me the whole time. It's like, how many BICN supporters does it take to switch on the lights in the room? So I think I'm going to be hearing that for a few times more. But
what's the punchline?
I'm told, so that's what he's asked me. You need to have a good punchline, and I've said 2.4. There you go, for whatever it's worth. We have a number of sponsors. I already mentioned the Institute of Health and Social Policy. We had CREUM, now CRE, which is the Center for Research in Ethics at the Université de Montréal, on the opposite side of the mountain. So thanks to Christine Tapelet, Peter Leach, and Valérie Giroux for that. We had the McGill Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism, and I don't know whether Colleen Shepherd is still here, but the director was actually here and gave a talk as well, so she was very interested in this. We also had a research group for constitutional studies. And actually, some of these people sent me, some of these people couldn't make it and apologized, and they also said it looked very interesting. Faculty of Social Work from the University of Manitoba, through Jim, and the Faculty of Social Sciences from Laval, through François Blais. And as many of you will know, François Blais recently got into the Quebec government, but so we, of course, sent him congratulations and invited him to come over. I still have to hear from him, but I'm not surprised that politics being what it is. We'll see how that works out. I also wanted to thank, there's been a number of community groups, and much to the work of Sharon Murphy, who managed to get a number of little community groups to put up a little bit of sponsorship to support low-income people. grateful to those groups and also to Sharon. So I want to thank the BICN board. So, you know, the Congress is organized by BICN, but there's also a separate board, and Sheila, and you know, we've had all the support from these people, me, Sheila and Pierre, and everyone involved. I want to thank we sort of had a NABIC committee. So, as you all know, the US group and the Canadian group every other year, well, every year organizes a conference, 1 year in Canada, 1 year in the US, back and forth. But because it coincided with the BICN thing, we didn't have a separate conference this year. But those people were involved in setting up some of the NABIC sessions and also in putting together the first stage program. So many thanks to Mike Howard, Michael Lewis, Almas, Jim, and Carl. I also want to thank the BNEC. Now, you know, one of the things, and I'm sure anyone who's organized one of these, is there's always like, you know, the BNEC, these are the people who are accountable for, you know, and at the same time, you know, we're also doing a lot of our own work and our own thinking. So it's very crucial to have a good working relationship, and I thought that worked really, really well. So I'm extremely happy to actually publicly say that it was really good working with you guys, and we appreciate all the support and the suggestions from speakers and so on, and also the funding that you put up. So thanks to Carl, Almas, Louise, Pablo, and everyone else. I'm on page 2 of 2 pages, so we're going to move fast now. We have a number of volunteers that, you know, you've seen all the, mostly students with the little blue labels who've been helping you out. They've been doing, you know, putting the coffee up, you know, cleaning your plates after, and so on and so forth. And we're very, very grateful to have had these people. And a lot of these people were extremely enthusiastic. So a lot of them were sitting in some of the sessions, and they all came out thinking this is extremely exciting stuff. I specifically want to thank Nicholas. Where's Nicholas?
Just like
It's always the same thing. Whenever you need him, he's there. Okay, I'm going to say it anyway. You know, he can. Is this still being filmed? So there you go. We'll send him a clip out. So Nicholas is a student here at the Faculty of Law of Daniel Weinstocks, and we were extremely fortunate that we managed to have him. He's been helping out in the last few weeks, preparing everything, you know, the exhibition back, and he's been working a huge amount of hours, you know, during the Congress, right? I think, I don't know how old he is exactly, 22, but probably starts having some gray hairs. So I, you know, in absentia, I would like to have a big applause for him. A number of other people were very, very helpful. Jonathan Rue, Jonathan there, who very recently sort of became interested in this and is now going to become more and more involved with our organization, really in the Quebec area. And Jonathan has a lot of contacts with the media, so all the things you may have heard, we've managed to get into several newspapers and radio interviews and so on, and that was mostly Jonathan's doing. For some reason, you also put your picture up there all the time. It's good, you know. It's good for aesthetic values. Rob Rayner from the Big Push helped us out a lot. Eleni Bakapanos, Elise Desaulniers did the website. Gabriel Newley is someone who isn't here, but who actually designed the little logo. We came across this, I came across this on the web, contacted him and said, do you mind if we use this? This is really, really good stuff. He was very happy for us to use it, so I just want to acknowledge him on this. And as you've noticed, I've plugged it on everywhere, so I've made really, really good use of that. Gabriela Kranz designed the booklet. Letty Morales did all the pictures, so there's about 200 or 300 of those going to be selected and disseminated in various ways. I also want to thank the people of the Jazz Festival to organize that at the same time. There's the plenary speakers. We're really, really very, very happy and excited to have had you all here. So we had Anna Reid, we had Antonio Prado, we had Guy Standing, and Renata. Is Renata still here? She's last. You know, amazing stuff. We've had, Joe Suss, who last night still was recovering from the fact that people thought he was too optimistic. We've had an amazing session with Enno and Stan and Philippe and Bart, and of course today we had Roberto. So I really want to thank all these people. I'm almost there. I too want to thank the people of the Congress Committee, actually. So Tim, Sharon, Linda, Jim, and I want to also especially acknowledge Jenna. Jenna did actually quite a lot of work on registration in the last few weeks, not weeks, months. So keeping that up to scratch takes up a lot of time, so I don't want to mention that. Myron, as the only other actual local person, had to suffer through my requests of, Myron, can you do this? Myron, can you do that? And I'm sure he must have enjoyed the moment when I called him and said, Myron, could you possibly tomorrow, pop down the shop and get us like 720 bottles of water? So, I don't have a car, Myron has, so I mean, really, you were extremely... And I also want to thank Kelly, because, Kelly was sort of saying I did all the work, but that's actually not true. I mean, I thought we worked extremely well together, and, I have a lot of things I can do and a lot of things I can't do, and we complemented each other amazingly. So it was really, really great fun, and I hope not to hear from you at least for a month. Finally, I want to thank all of you. I mean, conferences like this really only happen with the people here. So people came from all over the place. I mean, Australia, Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Latin America, Europe, of course, everywhere, and we know that going to Montreal is not that cheap and so on, so we appreciate all the efforts people done. Papers were great. We hope you take a lot home from this conference, and so, applaud yourselves.